Front cover. The Annunciation, detail of Verkündigung Mariae by Fra Filippo Lippi, circa 1406 to 1469. In Florence during the late Middle Ages and Renaissance, the story of the Annunciation took on a special meaning. Citizens of this wealthy and pious city dated the beginning of the new year at the feast day of the Annunciation, March 25th. In this city, as elsewhere in Europe, where the cathedral was dedicated to her, the Virgin naturally held a special place in religious life. To emphasize this, Fra Filippo sets the moment of Gabriel's visit to Mary in stately yet graceful surrounds which recede into unfathomable depths. Unlike Gabriel or Mary, the viewer can detect in the upper left-hand corner the figure of God the Father, who has just released the dove of the Holy Spirit. The dove, a traditional symbol of the third person of the Trinity, descends towards Mary in order to affirm the Trinitarian character of the Incarnation. The angel kneels reverently to deliver the astounding news, which Mary accepts with surprising equanimity. Her eyes focus not on her angelic visitor, but rather on the open book before her. Although Luke's Gospel does not describe Mary reading, this detail derived from apocryphal writings hints at a profound understanding of Mary's role in salvation history. Historically, Mary almost certainly would not have known how to read. Moreover, books like the one we see in Fra Filippo's painting came into use only in the first centuries CE. Might the artist and the original owner of this painting have greeted the Virgin's demeanor as a model of complete openness to God's invitation? The capacity to respond with such inner freedom demanded of Mary and us what Saint Benedict calls a listening heart. Only then can we, together with Mary, hope to realize a just world in which, as Gabriel promises, for God nothing will be impossible. January. Detail of Virgin and Child with Saints Dominicus and Thomas Aquinas by Fra Angelico, 1387 to 1455. Fra Angelico, a Dominican friar, painted this fresco in the friary of San Domenico, located midway on the road between Florence and Fiesole. The work celebrates the two principal saints of the Dominican order, its founder, Saint Dominicus, and its towering teacher, Saint Thomas of Aquinas. Because the Dominicans emphasized preaching and teaching above all else, the artist draws attention to the order's charism through the open book which each saint holds. Remarkably, the text of Psalm 104, verse 13, held by Saint Dominicus, is legible, but that held by Saint Thomas is not. As the friars walked past this fresco, did they glance at the text and ponder how the psalm's words, "The heavens declare the glory of God," might function in their preaching? Surely the friars would have noticed that both saints and the Virgin all draw our attention not to the texts, but to the living Word, the Christ child. Fra Angelico wants to suggest that the Word made flesh is the source of all teaching. February. Detail of raising of the son of Theophilus and Saint Peter on his throne by Masaccio, 1401 to 1428. Masaccio's great fresco cycle of the life of Saint Peter was commissioned for the Brancacci family chapel in the Carmelite church of Santa Maria del Carmine. The scene, known as Saint Peter Enthroned, recalls the legend of how the saint miraculously raised from the dead the son of Theophilus, ruler of Antioch. Theophilus promptly converted and expressed his gratitude by building a magnificent church for the Christian community of Antioch. According to tradition, Saint Peter occupied the throne as bishop in the city for 7 years. Masaccio sets the story in his own world of 15th century Florence. The apostle sits elevated, supposedly so that all the people could see their leader clearly. Amongst the men below him, we can identify Carmelite friars, and even the artist himself, for the figure at the right of the saint who looks out to the viewer has been identified as Masaccio. Through gestures and expression, the group gathered below the enthroned bishop expresses a mood of thoughtful reverence. Masaccio's direct gaze intercepts the viewers. In this moment of imaginary encounter, our different worlds temporarily meet. Our prayers unite with those of all who have gone before us. March. Detail of Eleazar and Rebecca at the Well by Nicolas Poussin, 1594 to 1665. Poussin, the great French artist of the Baroque, spent much of his artistic career in Rome. His paintings were commissioned and collected by monarchs, the papacy, and discerning collectors throughout the 17th century. The story of the meeting of Rebekah and Eleazar, the servant of Abraham, is recounted in the book of Genesis. Eleazar has been commissioned by Abraham to find a suitable wife for his beloved son Isaac. Eleazar's search would end when he found a woman who would draw water for him and his camels. Like many artists before him, Poussin depicts the moment when Rebecca is revealed as the chosen spouse. The artist suggests the encounter between Rebecca and Eleazar in a world far removed from 17th century Rome or 1st century Palestine. Figures wear costumes that suggest a distant, vaguely antique past. Eleazar's awkward bow evokes acknowledgement that Rebecca's act of kindness to a weary, thirsty traveller is the revelation that Eleazar has been looking for. Unusually, Poussin includes a number of other young women in the narrative. The scriptural account does not mention the presence of other young women. Artistically and psychologically, the viewer's appreciation of the story is enhanced by the inclusion of these women. Their elegant forms and stately movements bring measure and dignity to the composition. Any hint of classical sobriety is balanced by pastel tones, especially in the pinks and blues, which introduce a lighter note. The dramatic contrast Poussin sets up between Rebecca's responsive action and the departing figures remind us of God's promise to Abraham that his descendants would prosper. April. Descent from the Cross. Detail of Deposition of Christ by Rogier van der Weyden, circa 1399 to 1464. The Flemish artist Rogier van der Weyden painted this hauntingly beautiful painting of the Descent from the Cross to decorate the altar in the chapel of the Confraternity of Archers in the Flemish city of Louvain. The familiar subject in late medieval art recalls the moment alluded to in the Gospels when Jesus' body is taken down from the cross. The harrowing scene takes place in a narrow, stage-like space. Constrained into this shallow space, the figures move with awkward, even distorted poses. The unease and tension suggested by the figure's physical limitation of space and movement evokes for the viewer the states of mind of those present at the crucifixion. Christ's lifeless body appears suspended before the viewer's gaze. The arrangement of his body tilted forward and stretching across the right half of the picture may seem unnecessarily awkward until we note the echoing movement in the Virgin's pose. Rogier employs the mirror-like poses of Jesus and his mother to dramatize for the spectator the depth of Mary's compassionate identification with her son's suffering and death. Other figures likewise reveal their anguish through gestures and visual details which render sorrow with almost shocking realism. Only the tiny trickle of blood flowing from Christ's side wound hints beyond the Passion to the Resurrection. May. Detail of the Visitation by Jacopo da Pontormo, 1494 to 1557. Florence in the early 16th century justly deserves to be remembered as one of the greatest artistic centers of the Italian Renaissance, where Pontormo worked alongside Michelangelo and Raphael. Pontormo's career, however, won much less acclaim than his famous contemporaries. This detail from Pontormo's painting of the Visitation compels the viewer's attention. The artist departs from Luke's account of the story of Mary's meeting with her cousin Elizabeth by adding the two women who stand behind the mothers-to-be. How does the viewer interpret the function of the two women who stare out at us? Might they be attendants, companions of Mary and Elizabeth? Their enigmatic presence, like Pontormo's use of expressive movement in draperies and clashing color combinations, heightens our emotional engagement with the figures of Mary and Elizabeth. Restless energy in the billowing folds of Mary's blue cloak threatens to overwhelm her, yet her steadfast faith and courage finds expression in the interlocking gaze and gesture that she and Elizabeth exchange. Is this the moment of recognition when both Mary and Elizabeth acknowledge Mary as God-bearer? Pontormo makes the three other women affirm how magnificently the divine became one with us through Mary's audacious acceptance and embrace of God's invitation. June. Detail of Saints Peter and Paul by El Greco, Domenico Theotokopoulos, 1541 to 1614. The subject of Saints Peter and Paul are amongst the earliest examples of Christian art. Traditionally, artists strove to distinguish the two apostles. Peter was the apostle to the Jews, and the younger Paul was the apostle to the Gentiles. In this detail from a painting by El Greco, the artist adopts an unconventional view of the two martyrs. He portrays Peter as a contemplative, whose head tilts slightly to the left, while his gaze turns inward. Paul, in contrast, stares almost directly outward, as if he were about to set out on a journey toward one of his distant communities. We sense the decisive commitment of the apostle to bring the word of God to those who have yet to hear it. Whereas Peter's wistful gaze suggests a vulnerability, Paul's resolute stare conveys his unquenchable zeal to evangelize. El Greco dispenses with the traditional halos which symbolize saints in art. Yet his original 16th century audience would surely have recognized the two founders of the Church. In an unbroken tradition, artists had assigned to the two saints distinguishing facial features. Like previous painters, El Greco portrayed Peter with short gray hair and a curly beard, while he depicted Paul as bald with a dark beard. Not only does this contrasting characterization help us to identify the saints, but it also hints at deeper contrasts in their spiritual gifts. This painting nevertheless shows the two apostles expressing a unity of purpose that transcends difference in their personalities. July. Detail of the meeting of Joachim and Anna at the Golden Gate by Fra Filippo Lippi, circa 1406 to 1469. This small rectangular panel almost certainly originated as part of the bottom panel, or predella, for a large altarpiece. Fra Filippo Lippi, a Carmelite friar and compatriot of Masaccio and Fra Angelico, spent much of his artistic career working for church patrons in central Italy. As seen in this charming panel, his storytelling talent won renown also in great fresco cycles, as well as majestic altarpieces. In this scene, the meeting of Joachim and Anna at the Golden Gate, Anna and Joachim inhabit a world that comes alive with delicately observed detail. Rush mats, sparkling streams, and placid wading birds gradually lead our eye through a serene landscape. The story which celebrates the moment of Mary's Immaculate Conception derives from apocryphal legends. Anna and Joachim, a somewhat older couple, have longed for a child. Despite their years of prayers and faithful service in their community, the longed-for pregnancy has not occurred. Yet, as often happens in the Scriptures, a couple well past childbearing age learn that God will bless them with a child. Heavenly messengers tell the parents to go to the Golden Gate at Jerusalem. The moment the two parents-to-be see each other there, they rush to embrace. Their joyful physical union signals symbolically the moment of Mary's conception. The shimmering colors of the ecstatic couple's clothing evokes for us a decisive change both in their status and ours. As their maturity comes alive with hope beyond any possible imagining, we too identify with the new beginning that this story announces. August. Detail of the Virgin with 6 Saints by Gregorio Lazzarini, 1655 to 1730, and Giambattista Tiepolo, 1692 to 1770. Tiepolo's small painting, The Virgin with 6 Saints, displays many of the qualities which made him a sought-after court artist from Würzburg in southern Germany to Madrid. His paintings and frescoes radiate an energy and inventiveness which transformed familiar subjects with fresh insights. Here the subject, the Virgin of the Immaculate Conception, appears before the viewer in an appealing, intimate drama. Mary hovers a little above a group of earthbound saints as an athletic angel holds her aloft on billowing clouds. Her elevated position and the spiraling movement of her draperies establish the Virgin's heavenly credentials. Heaven is her home. Yet her appearance amongst the saints reminds us of her role as mediator and mother of all. Tiepolo portrays her gazing down, with arms outstretched towards the earth, to underline the immediacy of her love for humanity. The saints situated across the center of the picture create a horizontal bridge between heaven and earth. From the left, Saints Louis, King of France, Peter Alcantara, and Teresa of Avila stand, while Joseph lounges on a cloud. The lower part of the picture completes the detail reproduced here with the inclusion of 2 further saints, Francis of Assisi and Filippo Neri. Banks of clouds effortlessly ascend from earth, moving upwards until they dissolve against the dazzling radiance of the heavens. Although the cloud-like God does not offer himself as a goal to be reached for, neither is he remote and beyond our sight. Our God, born of a woman, envelops us in all our human contradictions. September. Detail of Saint Jerome by Domenico Ghirlandaio, 1448 to 1494. Saint Jerome, circa 345 to 420, whose feast day falls on September 30th, is commemorated in this fresco by Ghirlandaio in the Florentine church of Ognissanti. The great scholar and founder of ascetic communities is remembered above all as the translator into Latin of the Hebrew Scriptures and Greek New Testament. Ghirlandaio portrays the scholar saint in his study. The setting the artist imagines suggests the world of a 15th century scholar-monk, or perhaps of a learned lawyer, for the legal profession claimed Jerome as patron saint. The surface of objects found in this well-furnished study, such as the grain of Jerome's wooden writing desk or the metallic gleam of the candlestick and scissors, evoke material reality unmistakably. Splashes of ink are splattered around the inkwells attached to Jerome's desk. Such anecdotal details help us identify with the figure who gazes out towards the viewer. Jerome appears in a moment of introspection, his pen poised, while in his other hand he holds a folded piece of paper. Ghirlandaio invites us to wonder about the cause of the saint's break from writing. Is he perhaps recalling his spiritual friends and companions, Paula and Eustochia? We find a clue to Jerome's pensive attitude in the Greek inscription on the paper nailed to the shelf at his right. The text from Psalms reads, "O God, have mercy on me, according to your pity." October, detail of St. Augustine and the boy on the seashore. Presentation of the rule to his followers by Benozzo Gozzoli, 1420 to 1497. St. Augustine, circa 354 to 430, a native of North Africa, remains one of the most influential theologians in the history of the Church. These scenes from the cycle of St. Augustine's life were frescoed by the Florentine artist and pupil of Fra Angelico in the years 1464 to 1465. A community of Augustinian friars commissioned the cycle to decorate the apse of the church in the Tuscan town of San Gimignano. The events portrayed here, St. Augustine and the boy on the seashore and presentation of the rule to his followers, fall towards the end of this cycle of 18 scenes. The first episode at the left recounts a legend demonstrating St. Augustine's humility before the mystery of God. One day by the seashore, while meditating upon the Trinity, the saint noticed a young child spooning seawater into a hole in the sand. Augustine commented on the pointlessness of the child's effort, only to be reminded by the child of the equally pointless task of attempting to unravel the mystery of the Trinity. In Gozzoli's interpretation, the child wears the halo reserved only for Christ, a type known as the triple nimbus. This detail neatly underscores how easily the quest for learning sometimes confuses knowledge for wisdom. The second scene, St. Augustine presenting his rule to his followers, surely develops the theme of the earlier episode. Discernment can be achieved only through the cultivation of faithful listening and reflection. November, detail of 4 saints from Last Judgment by Pietro Cavallini, circa 1240 to circa 1320. The Roman Church of Santa Cecilia in Trastevere was founded, it is believed, on a site associated with the early Christian martyr, the patron saint of music, Saint Cecilia. The church thus boasts a long history as a site of devotion in Rome. Successive rebuilding and restructuring of the church's earlier fabric included the addition of a new facade and interior during the 18th century. These more recent features sometimes leave the 21st century visitor unprepared for the breathtaking 13th century frescoes by Pietro Cavallini, which were discovered in 1900. Little is known about this Roman artist. Scholars now recognize his enormous contribution to the development of late medieval art in Italy. This detail of 4 saints from Cavallini's majestic Last Judgment reveals his innovative approach to the human figure. We must imagine 2 ranks, one on either side of the central figure of Christ in majesty. The saints identified from the left, Matthew, Bartholomew, Philip, and James the Greater, comprise together with Andrew and Paul a group of 6 apostles seated on Christ's right. The scene of the Last Judgment, frescoed on the inside wall of the facade, thus faced the onlooker as she exited the church. Our seated figures, who, apart from St. Bartholomew, turn slightly in their thrones, command the spectator's gaze. Light seems to enter from the left, thus illuminating the saints so that their bodies appear to recede and project into space with convincing naturalism. Cavallini was one of the first painters to achieve such effects. These figures take on not only the appearance of living human beings, through gestures and facial expression, their powerful presence reminds us of their status as living embodiments of the community of saints. December. Detail of Adoration of the Magi from the predella of the Cortona altarpiece with the Annunciation, by Fra Angelico, 1387 to 1455. The subject of the Adoration of the Magi in Renaissance art encouraged the artist to play up the pageantry and exoticism of the legendary elements of the story. In Fra Angelico's version, which he painted for an altar in the Dominican church of Cortona, a mood of intimate reverence pervades the familiar tale of how the travelers from the East arrived in Bethlehem to render homage to a ruler who will govern my people Israel. The composition moves from left to right as our attention is led to the Christ child. Dressed in costly fabrics, the kings present in turn their gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh to the child and his mother. Fra Angelico narrates the event of the king's ritual gestures with imaginative insight. Note how the artist depicts the king's figure sprawled at the feet of the seated mother and child, as if viewed from slightly above. From the viewer's elevated position, the king thus appears less grand and even humble as he kisses the child's foot. Details like the glimpse of the donkey peeking from out of the stable door towards the Virgin's halo imbue the story with tenderness amid the solemnity. As our gaze moves towards the end of the procession, we reach the moment when the eldest king and Joseph exchange greetings as the king hands the gift to the father. As we know, Joseph will continue as steadfast protector of his young wife and newborn child. One cannot help wondering if the individual gifts brought by the king conceal deeper meanings. The tenderness with which the gifts are given and received surely hints that these are treasures far beyond material value.